Hello and
Star
welcome
Citizen.
to the Citizen Situation, the Star Citizen podcast in which we, your hosts, address Cloud Imperium games and the Star Citizen community openly and critically. To do this, each episode we debate a topic around Star Citizen. In doing this, we will address the issues, state our minds, debate them, and finally close off with our thoughts for possible solutions. As always, it's our aim to see Star Citizen succeed, and a key part of making that happen is in our belief to offer clear and constructive criticism. So without further ado, I'll allow the hosts to introduce themselves, starting with our guest for this week, Rumged.
Hello, my name is Rumged. Most people just call me Rumbo. People give up on the last part. I founded a Discord for racing pilots called PGO, where we share tips, tricks, and anything else racing related for Star Citizen. Outside of that, I'm a conscientious backer, Evo Cuddy tester, and a fairly decent racing pilot on top of that. So yeah, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. Really happy to have you around for this podcast. So, thank you. As I said, thank you for joining. And next up, Asuna, take it away.
As everyone knows already from the previous episodes, I am concierge level backer. I'm a volunteer, streamer, and bar citizen organizer. I've been playing Star Citizen for 4 years, still enjoying it. I love Star Citizen. I've been loving it since day one, but I'm also not afraid to voice my opinion when I don't like some of the changes that the developers make. And now up for the amazing Traz.
Thanks, Asuna. Hey y'all, Traz Ion here. I'm a founder of the Star Citizen Ready Player One Facebook group. It's a pretty large social community supporting the Star Citizen experience. I coordinate a variety of other related projects locally, doing like bar citizens and things like that. A lifelong gaming enthusiast, not want to see Star Citizen succeed, but you know, I've got some strong opinions about the various methodologies that have brought us to this point. But you know, yay! Anyway, Carde, that's our illustrious host. Tell us a little bit about yourself, good sir.
Thank you, Traz. I am Carde, a backer in mid-concierge levels. I joined the project during the Kickstarter days. I am, like Asuna, a volunteer for CLG events. I've had 3 Gamescoms and a CitizenCon behind my belt. Last one was not for this year, but the previous year. The US was a little bit out of my way. I have also been a gamer for a very long time, but I'm also a lover of science fiction and also some fantasy. And I'm writing as well myself, so I've been writing for about 15 years. So yeah, story is for me really important alongside with the universe setting and things like that. So there you have me. And with those introductions out of the way, let us get us into the point for this episode. We have had a panel at CitizenCon. We have had a reverse the first. We are of course talking about a new flight model. And quotation marks are definitely in order in this one. Because at the core, there's really not much new about it. It's simply a tweaking of the numbers within a system that was already created. The question that this brings to us, is this going to be a step in the right direction, or are we walking backwards once again? Now we have a lovely diverse roundup for this topic. For starters, our guest Rum is a top-tier racing pilot. Asuna is our more casual pilot for small and medium ships, with a focus more on exploration rather than combat or racing. Traz is our resident fighter pilot, who loves the 6 directions of freedom. And finally you have myself, the lazy, do not want to fly, but sit in the center chair and bark orders at those who do. So, we should have a fairly diverse look towards a flight model, as it was in the past, where it seems to be going, and start talking about it, because opinions will be quite fierce, I think, on this one. So, for our opening statements, Rum, why don't you take us away?
Well, I don't think it's a step in the wrong direction or backwards, as you phrased it. Honestly, I don't think anything CAD could do to the flight model would be as bad as 3.0. And But I would also like to see CIG listen more to the hardcore combat pilots. And you might think that's strange coming for a racing pilot, but I've been racing for almost 2 years now, and then whatever garbage race model wise or flight model that CIG have thrown out, like, it's still been enjoyable. Sure, it could be more fun, but it's been enjoyable, and we've been able to run tournaments with between 15 and 20 people in an average. So, like, racing wise, we've been able to do what we enjoy, where combat is really stale right now, I feel. So yeah, that's why I think CID should listen more to the combat pilots compared to just PU or racing pilots. Where it's racing pilots, we've been through the rough patch, quote unquote, with 3.0, and we've still been able to enjoy ourselves. Now moving on to the news that we've gotten from with the panel and the RTV, I find it hard to get that feel from the videos. Like, I think the stuff that David Coulson said about 3 different flight modes, so the World War II one for in atmosphere, and then more of an asteroid one for the 6 degrees of movement for space, was interesting, but until I actually have my hands on it and try it out, I find it really hard to judge if it's a good or a bad decision. And honestly, the QA testers from CIG have been kind of awful, and I think 3.0 and the bugs that was in 3.1 showed that extremely well. So yeah, listen to actually good pilots. No offense, CIG, but a lot of your pilots aren't. Yeah, let's see. The limiter, I found that interesting, but again, how does that actually affect flight? So, and here I'm thinking more in terms of combat. Yeah. Also, I think it's important to point out that Star Citizen have been. How long have you been able to do space combat now?
4 years.
After the first year, I think we had about a year.
And how many different iterations of the flight model have you had?
Quite a bit.
Quite a lot, right?
Yeah.
And CIG is still like, shit, we gotta redo this. At least from my perspective, says a lot about both how hard it is to do right, but also, you've had this long to test it, and it's still garbage, right? So that's like, I have a hard time to get excited about it, but I am looking forward to learning it anew, basically.
Okay.
So yeah.
Right,
Anyways, who would like to go next?
Asuna.
Would probably me.
Yep.
So I agree. It's
You're up.
basically the combat pilots that use the most diverse set of ways of maneuvering. I don't think racers or casual players would know all the ways to maneuver in comparison to like the big top tier combat pilots. So if you want to know the best ways to fly, and then I mean CIG needs to know it, then yeah, the good combat pilots are the people you want to talk to. And I've seen the videos today. I do agree, I like the looks of it. I have no idea how it's gonna feel yet, so that I want to play it. But on the other hand, I could see more weight in the ship than I can do right now. And I like the feel of a ship that has some weight.
Okay.
Like, I like, if I'm having a big ship, I want to feel it. and I couldn't always feel it with some ships. I do hope they make it. Well, what some people said is like 6 degrees of movement is only alien ships. I feel it's more that alien ships, like the Scout, have their maneuvering thrusters better placed than human ships. So they're better at it, but they're not as fast. And then you compare it to the human ships that have big engines on the back. And they have a totally different kind of flying. And I like both.
Well, then, let's go. Traz, what is your opening statement on this one?
Well, I think you made a good point starting out talking about the fact that it's often stated that, oh, it's a new flight model. It isn't, actually. The engine is the same. The tool set that they're using they made some changes about how they test it, but the underpinning engine behind the flight experience remains the same. It's just a matter of how they're changing the values and strengths of those various inputs. So it bothered me a little bit when I watched the RTV, and Disco spoke to it like it was a whole new flight model, and it's like I feel like this disingenuous, and it misleads the community. They're not building a new flight model. John Pritchett's flight model still remains the core system, and it is brilliant. And it's just a matter of the designers over the years. Again, right, these new iterations just change things around. And while I'm looking forward to the new, this is a change. So I'm looking forward to the challenge of learning a new system. I definitely see some stumbling blocks that I feel like are being overlooked in the pitch of, hey, look, it's new and shiny, it's going to be great, when I feel like there are definitely some older lessons where they've done aspects of this before and it didn't work, and I wish that they had better learned that. But I feel like they've handed off John Pritchett's system to this new team, new people, and not to say that they weren't involved in it prior, but the design authority has now been transferred. And so, but we'll get to the details of that later. Asuna, I agree with you in the sense that, right, I do want big ships to have weight. I've got no problem with that. I had no problem with them talking about, oh, the maneuvering thrusters were a little too strong, maybe they need a little tweaking. I suppose the core comment of my own that I'll contribute as an opening statement, though, is that I believe that regardless of the aesthetics of these spaceships, which are largely designed to look like airplanes, at the end of the day, while I'm all for an almost wholly simulation type experience, the one time that I believe that they need to judge in the favor of fun over simulation is in regards to space combat. If space combat is 90% of the combat that happens in this game, and that's probably lowballing it, if space combat is the 90%, you need to make sure that space combat is fun, and diminishing maneuvering thrusters so that you're trying to use airplanes in space, except that you don't have lift as a mechanism to do hard maneuvers like you do in atmosphere, means that you're basically playing power boats in space, or basically asteroids. They talked about the asteroid flight model, which basically means you're gonna shoot at somebody and then turn and then main thruster boost to dodge and then turn and then shoot. That sounds fine if you were doing long range combat, but they're forcing us into short range combat and slow combat. I don't think that's going to work out quite as well as they're selling it to us. Now I have some ideas about how maybe they can mitigate that and deliver a better experience. So I've definitely been trying to focus on being solution minded, even though I have a lot of criticism about the proposed changes, even as some of their changes are actually amazing and have been much needed for a long time. But we'll talk about the details later. So I'm worried. That is my core statement. I'm worried. We'll see. That's my opening.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you all very much. Just going to recap. If you're wondering why I'm looking down, I am actually writing down notes on classic old pen and paper style.
Does that in 2018? Shit, man.
Yes, I
Keep
always
doing
have a
it.
notepad
Does
next to
that.
my computer. It works really,
Type it into a
really
Google
well.
document, you hippie.
And it's less noisy than my mechanical keyboard because you're going to shout at me if I'm going to use that all the time. Believe me.
I'll shout.
Who does that?
So, from what you said, Ram, is something I found actually quite interesting. Like you said, as the racers, you're always being like, we can make it work.
Yeah.
Whatever the flight model is. And it's like, it reminds me, like when you're talking, when you're looking at racing series and things like that, one of the keys is like, as a racing driver in real life, of course, you just have to deal with whatever the rules are given to you, and you have to operate within those rules. So your mentality towards something like that is somewhat different than a combat pilot. Do you think I got it right there?
Yeah, because I combat is the experience of, me against another person, where yes, racing is that, but at least to myself, and I know a lot of the other racers feel this, like, we race because we're competitive, but it's more of a challenge to ourselves.
Yeah.
And within the restrictions that, like, we as a community or from a racing or from a flight model perspective or whatever is laid upon us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think
that's the.
Can I add to that?
I think that makes a really good point in the sense that just from a game design philosophy, if you're going to have player versus player engagements, you can't design a game from a player versus environment standpoint and then tack on player versus player rules afterwards, because the game will never be balanced.
Yeah.
If you're going to have a game that's player versus player and that's a core component of the game, you have to design the flight, the combat, and balance it at the PvP level first.
But then we're going onwards.
Everything else can roll down after that.
Yeah.
And I think you captured that really well, because racing is competitive, but it's a different kind of mindset and competition. It's not all the dice are on the line, because you're still working within a more narrow set of rules. But man, you ace racers, man, you guys are amazing too. So like, don't sell yourself short. I've seen it. It's amazing.
Yeah. So basically, races are player versus environment, and combat is ship versus ship, like player versus player, and that can be player versus NPC, but still ship versus ship. So you'll have to take both their maneuvering in mind, that they're looking at each other. And racing is purely
racing
versus the environment.
Racing is, I'd say, as the way I see it, always is like the primary goal in a racing is trying to get around a given circuit as fast as possible. And that there are other drivers or pilots on that same circuit is like they are an additional obstacle. And yes, you are competing with them and getting the fastest time, but it's not the primary objective in your on what you're doing. Anyway, so that was with the racing that you mentioned there. And just still recapping the opening statements here, like as I mentioned here, is like the higher the skill cap, higher the skill ceiling, of the player is, like the more affected they are by these kind of changes. Also being mentioned, and I think that's a very fair point. And it's something you see back in a lot of games. Is like if you're gonna make changes, the smallest of change is gonna be sometimes an enormous change for somebody that's playing at the absolute top of their ability in a game. It's like, because suddenly, like, that tiny small change can require them to completely 180 their playstyle in a different direction, because something else is no longer working well as the players down below in mediocre levels, or even down, it's like, as they say, the bronze tiers in many games, like, to them, they probably won't even notice the difference because it's such a minute change. So the more skilled you are, the more a change in anything is likely going to affect you. That said, I think with how fairly serious this flight, this one another flight system balancing overall is going to be, I think everybody will notice this one quite clearly. I think that's even if you're a terrible pilot like myself, I will notice the difference, I think. Even if I'm just flying against when I'm flying against somebody else, or even the environment.
Yeah, compare it to like basically the entire combat and part of the movement system of any MMO that's being changed there and balanced.
Changed, like suddenly take a larger take a tab-based MMO and make it so that strafing your character is suddenly not 100% speed but 90% speed. It's going to completely overhaul combat for people on the highest tiers. But if you're on the lower tier, then it's going to be like, yeah, whatever. You're not going to know.
So, I mean, I suppose we would have to talk about the specifics that they're suggesting.
Yeah, that's
coming down the pipeline.
We have to go into those in the details.
Put context to any criticisms we might have, but
we will go into there. I'll quickly recap the other things. Like Traz, you mentioned, like they should not, like the aesthetics of the ship should not really direct 100% where they're going with, because well, you want fun above all else. I think that's a very fair thing, and I also think, like, come on, it's a science fiction universe. You can do some hand waving and make stuff happen. So that's something I will say I fully agree with. You did mention that space combat was like going to be 90%. I have my doubts on that one, but that's going to be have to see.
You think atmospheric will take over as a primary place to do battle?
I also think we also have a lot of first-person shooter combat.
Sure.
Ground-based combat, things like that.
But neither of those things happen with the same ship. I was only talking about the spaceship.
If you're talking spaceship combat, most of the fights likely will be in space. Right. Because I think a lot of people won't really fancy flying in atmosphere all that much, especially with most ships being terribly optimized for it.
Right. Because ship performance doesn't have anything to do with FPS.
No.
So, you know...
Oh, sorry, you want to say?
There was a part about today's video, or about CitizenCon's flight mechanic. They were talking about how they've been nerfing the Aurora. Well, it's the most used and most loved ship because it's the basic starter package.
Yeah, that was depressing. I was like, wait, you're talking about nerfing the Aurora more? Or like...
They weren't talking about nerfing it, and they were talking about giving it more love. But then in yesterday's RTV, they were talking about how the Aurora is horrible at flying in atmosphere.
Well, sure. I mean,
it's fine. Like, they want to give it more love, and at the same time, it's going to be horrible, even more horrible than it's now in atmosphere. Like,
I think
the opportunities they had to improve the Aurora were grandly missed in the redesign.
It's a beginner ship. Most of the people will have it. How they're going to experience the starting of the game will be mostly in the Aurora. If that's going to be horrible at most places, then good luck keeping the people.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think the specifics regarding those ships, I will... we will be making some dedicated stuff towards those as well, because there's a lot to be said on them.
We'll have an entire episode dedicated to the Aurora. We promise.
Starter ships, yep.
Soon.
He also mentioned asteroid combat, like shooting main thrusters up and down. It's not going to really work well at the slower speeds. I think that's an interesting one to come back on later. Now, with all of those points, as I said, for me, the flight system, it's not, personally, it doesn't really matter to me directly, because I'm not really planning to fly a lot, and I dread flying in Squadron 42, because I know I'm not really the best pilot, and it's not something I find the most enjoyable. However, for me, it is really important that people enjoy flying in Star Citizen, because I need people to fly my fighters. I mean, as I said, I'm sitting on a center chair. I've got an Idris. I will have 3 fighters on board that thing. I need people to fly those fighters for me. And if people are not going to find it fun to fly those fighters for me, we're going to have a problem. So indirectly, I am very much into wanting a flight system that appeals to the combat pilots.
I can speak to that. I recently redesigned my fleet, and trusting that the Saber and the Hornet would both be basically, they can't get those wrong because those are too critical to the main play experience. I definitely have a number of both of those. And now at this point, with the way they're talking about human ships being so biased to their rear engines, just because the aesthetic that they chose to sell ships with was airplanes, because it looks sexy. the thing is I'm like, man, what do I need to do I would go all Xi'an fighters now, except that, they have the lowest DPS and have been so unloved as well. It's like, I'm like, wow. Well, I guess if the flight model's terrible, I'll just become a capital captain.
Yeah,
I think it's a really an issue.
It's only the Xi'an that actually 6 degrees of freedom, because even the Defender and the Merchantman have big engines on the back, mainly.
Yeah, but it's like, I think it's, if you're looking at spaceships in general, like, especially on larger ships, having massive engines on the back only, it makes 100% complete sense. Because you're also looking at an enormous cost factor. Engines should be by far one of the most expensive things on anything. I mean, if you compare it like a modern day jetliner, like people are like, oh, why is everybody going towards 2 engines instead of 4? Well, because those engines cost like 40 million a piece. It's an enormous cost factor. So you want to have as little of them as possible. And regarding a large ship, your maneuverability is not really that worried. So if you need to decelerate, you just kind of flip your ship around and you use the same main engine to decelerate.
In a realistic fighting space game, yes. In a realistic Newtonian physics-based game, you would flip 180 and you would decelerate. Matter of fact, if you were going to a destination, you would accelerate 50% of the time and you would decelerate 50% of the time. However, because Star Citizen goes for the whole, starfighters at close range, they needed to think about this before they started designing and selling ships. At the end of the day, they chose to go with marketing because selling sexy airplanes that are spaceships made a lot of money very quickly because everybody can attribute to that. At the end of the day, now 6 years later, they're like, oh, let's make the physics simulation part of the game match the aesthetic. And while in almost 90% of the situations, I'm like, please go with the simulation aspect over the arcade style. When it comes to the actual dogfighting, my fear is that by actually treating that purely simulationist, we're actually losing the main part of what makes space dogfighting fun. I mean, I think dogfighting an atmosphere with this new model is going to be great.
Yeah, but let's with this flight model and the whole systems around it, like just a hypothetical scenario. Because one of the things is like where some people are talking about is that this system is going to lower the skill ceiling of the game, regarding to combat sighting. Some people, of course, will be like, "Oh, great! Now I stand a better chance because I'm not as good as a pilot." Now, for me personally, I'm of the faith. I believe the skill ceiling should be really high because it gives people something to strive for. It creates a diversity, and it also creates a barrier against certain accusations of a pay to win.
I'm gonna interject a little on that one.
Yeah, perfect.
I would like a high skill ceiling because it makes it more challenging for me. But how you get to that skill ceiling also needs to be a factor. I think I was before we started. I was watching the Games Done Quick live stream, and they were speed running Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is not a challenging game to play, but some of the shit that he was doing in there, blew my mind that you could actually do that in a Donkey Kong game, and I want to, see that. I don't want to be able to go out there and be, Jesus Christ of combat pilots. I'll maybe it's just me who's a bit sadistic in that point, but I don't mind going out there and doing 40 hours of training and die every single, duel that I have with some of these combat pilots because that is their thing. I think, but learning to do it in of itself, I also think should be rewarding. And currently, now I can only talk from a racing perspective, but currently getting to a point where you're quote unquote good, is really fucking hard. But once you reach that, it's really fun.
Yeah, I think for me, always a lot of people when you're playing games, they say you have a difficulty curve like this, or it should be something like this, straight lines, or something that's exponentially like this. I always would argue that you need something like this at the absolute bottom. You're going to be absolutely useless. It should be a relatively easy climb to become,
Fine.
useful. Yeah, become decent.
More of a ladder.
But after that, after you
fast.
reach that part where you're going to be decent at it, like you're going to be competent, I think from there on you should have this exponential growth, where it should become like you go better, but it's getting harder and harder and harder for every little bit of incremental increase in what you're going to achieve. I think that creates a system where you don't feel useless if you're not very good, but also it feels really rewarding if you really get and you're spending the time and you're getting to those really high levels in either whether it's a combat flying or whether it's racing flying. So yeah, sorry, Traz cameras froze there for a moment.
Second.
Yeah, but the reason I was starting with this one is I actually was thinking regarding those skill caps and how hard it's going to be. Is a potential scenario. Say, Rum, you're not racing, but you're flying a data runner ship.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the speed, and you need to be able to get through it. And say I'm sitting on my Idris, and you're flying your data runner. You're going through an asteroid field, and Traz is hunting you down because he managed to track you down. He's the combat pilot, but you're the racing pilot. So within that asteroid field, you're likely going to have the edge in dodging him because you don't want to fight him because you're not really a good combat pilot and your ship is not designed for it. But here I am sitting on an Idris, but I'm not going to be able to go near that asteroid field because it's going to be a danger to my ship. So say I got on board 3 novice pilots. And they're flying like, say, 3 Gladiuses now. Very decent ships, but they're novice pilots. How would you see something like that playing out? Because you're really being fast, so you need the help from my Gladiuses to get you back to safety. But Traz is going to be a very, very good combat pilot who's trying to hunt you down. If you're looking at like a flight system as we have right now in full 6 directions of freedom, where the skill ceiling arguably is higher, versus what they're talking about right now, where the skill ceiling is going to be lower.
Well, I don't think the skill ceiling for getting away is not that high. It's just point the direction, press afterburner.
Yeah, but if you're flying through a dense asteroid field, you need to be maneuvering around a lot.
I would still give it to the racer every time. When it comes to asteroid, like he would either he'd have the advantage in combat just because he's better at maneuvering through those kinds of like tight spaces, or he's definitely going to be able to exit the situation. My combat skills can't come to bear if he can get away.
Also, if it's a dense asteroid field, I'll be doing a lot of turns and that sort of deal. I don't know. Have you ever seen close races between 2 really good pilots? If not, I'll find some videos for you guys. But there's a very short amount of time where you'll be able to even put your guns on me. And if we are flying at high speeds and you trying to, unless you're running gimbaled, I don't think it would be possible for you to do it. Unless you're like.
See, that brings up one of the issues I think with the flight models that Chris has mandated that it be a more cinematic experience. So they keep trying to slow down.
It looks cool, but doesn't.
And they keep trying to close the distance between, even just for dogfighting, because they want it to be a pretty experience. So my question, rather than giving my own opinion, my question to you 3 is, or first to our guest, being a experienced race pilot. I mean, if you don't do any combat, that's fine. But like even just as a racer, how have these changes to the flight model affected or impacted whether it's enjoyable or not? And same thing for Asuna, because you fly piloting, even if more casually so. Right? Like, what's your thoughts?
Well, I like learning new stuff. I know a lot of people don't, and that's why they knew as soon as 3.0 came out that it was going to change. And I'm sure I can find a screenshot of myself saying that somewhere. Like, it was garbage from the beginning, and so I'm sorry, but that is, my opinion of 3.0, and I don't. But honestly, from the changes that affected racing, they have made it easier on some points. Like a lot of the G-forces and that sort of deal have been a lot easier in 3.0. But then Afterburner, no matter how much I hate that mechanic, it has also added skill levels that removing the G-forces didn't, because it requires a lot of knowledge of how it actually works to utilize it properly to gain. And a second might not sound like a lot, but when well, yes and no. It's easy to lose a second in Star Citizen in terms of like just doing a single line incorrectly can lose you a second. So a second is not a lot, but once you get some of the really good pilots, and here I'm talking like top 5, top 10 pilots, a second is a huge deal, and being able to do that consistently is impressive. And there I don't think the changes have mattered all that much. There it's more of the negligence that CIG have left the flight model in.
But at that point,
all of the
pilot skill is compensating for the trash of the changes.
Yeah.
So is that right?
I think the biggest and why I think the flight model right now is really frustrating is because of all of the bugs. It's not. I don't like Afterburner, and I also think that Boost, at least in its current iteration, is a bad flight mechanic, because both in combat and in racing, you just want to hold it down the entire time. You don't. This is not a challenge.
You want to max your performance.
Yeah.
And trusting the pilot's skill to deal with the consequences.
It's not an good interactive.
No. So if it's just something I can hold down, just leave it out. Like that's.
Good one. But let's move it on to Asuna also to answer the question.
I forgot the question.
What are your thoughts on the differences from prior days to now, as far as how the reduction in speed and the closure of range has impacted just fun, enjoyment?
Both good and bad, I'd say. It's easier as a horrible combat pilot. It's easier to shoot other people if it's closer, but at the same time, people are also away from your screen a lot faster. I understand Chris wants to make it cinematic, but at the same time, it's a game and not a movie.
Right.
Like, for one of the Reliance, it's probably fun to see it, because it can broadcast what it's seeing. But how is it for the combat pilots? I've lost a bit of my maneuverability from somewhere in 2.6 to where we are now. I used decoupled more in the past than I do it now, but I sort of miss it.
Yeah.
And I know it's still there.
I find it quite interesting that you say like it's easier for you in the closer ranges.
But
because I'm the polar opposite.
Yeah, same here.
I find it easier, but at the same time, someone is also super fast away from your screen, because people keep flying at top speeds. So one moment you'll see them and the next you don't.
It makes it a lot more reactionary, I find, rather than tactical.
Mm-hmm.
Like the longer the ranges are, the more tactics come into play. I feel in the combat, instead of it's just like becoming a reactionary system. Like if we're comparing it to, say, a first-person shooters, it's like a Call of Duty versus a Ghost Recon Wildlands. Like on one hand, I'm sniping at targets at 600 meters because I spent the last 30 minutes scouting out an entire base. I know if I kill this guy, he's not inside of anybody else. And on the other hand, I have something. Oh, there's somebody around the corner. Brrr, shoot him down, and maybe I miss, maybe I don't.
I would
difference there in game.
from a a decoupled pilot, combat pilot perspective, I would suggest that part of the problem that you're having there may have to do with the fact that you probably need to graduate out of coupled mode. Everybody flies coupled mode because that's what we're all sold as the airplane experience, but really for space combat to be, and I wouldn't say for racing, because in racing coupled works as kind of traction control, but in combat,
no, ComStat does.
Decoupled allows me to do maneuvers because when I know a pilot's going to do that, they're going to accelerate or their speed is going to have them shoot off my screen. I can compensate for that with my own maneuvering. And that's why, like, I posted you guys a video earlier because I wanted you to take a look at it to see what that looks like, because you have all these commentators who talk about combat like it's only jousting or it's only circle strafing. I'm like, if you're an advanced pilot and that's all you're doing and you're not mixing and matching and adjusting in the moment, you're not that expert.
Well, Traz, I know you said that you've had a break from Star Citizen, but since Rio, where they removed the sideways steez, all you had to do was side strafe. And if there is an easy way out to quote unquote win every time, well, then people are going to use that, and you were guaranteed not to black out from doing it. Now they have since changed that, but it's still there to a degree.
That actually begs the question: should G-Force even stay in the game?
Well, I think so, because it adds a layer of challenge.
It does, again, but then they made all the changes to, like, the stuff with the Valkyrie and the larger ships. So when you start getting into ships where you're walking around because they're a multi-crew ship and you've got artificial gravity, and they're talking about they're going to have G-forces affecting you inside these artificially gravitated ships, but like it's one of the things where, like, I feel like they need to either have it or they need to not. And I like G-forces because for the same reason you do, I think it adds an extra element. But there's also a point where if you're in the heat of a really intense dogfight, and that is the most enjoyable part of your dogfight, and then a game mechanic takes that away from you, I don't know. Like,
then I'm going
they need to make up their mind.
Then I'm going to argue that you should have taken care of that, just like you tell me to fly decoupled instead of coupled. Like it's a part then of, I think it's a good part because it provides a limit beyond the ship's limit.
My complaint there is just that if you're going to have G-forces with fighters, then you need to have a better explanation for why they or how they do or do not interact with the larger ships. Because they're talking about with like the Valkyrie, we're going to have.
Oh yeah, but a lot of the larger ships aren't going to be able to maneuver quickly enough for you to black out. Like, come on.
Right, but then why do you have to have a drop ship to drop people?
But
you know what I mean?
I don't know.
Well, I know. Well, their explanation was that there's going to be G-forces, and you can get thrown around in the ship if you're not like sitting in a seat. I'm like,
well, I mean, there's a difference between flying through space and that aspect and flying through an atmosphere, because an atmosphere, of course, can put in things like turbulence and things like that, which can really throw even a ship the size of Valkyrie, turbulence and wind shears and stuff like that. They can wreak havoc on that thing. So you could suddenly, like planes in real life, like a plane can suddenly just drop a couple of 100 feet instantly, just because the air density suddenly drops away, and you just see them go, like, that shit can happen. So there are reasons behind that, I think, and also some you want the gameplay aspect. But I do think it comes down to the fact in space, the larger ships just don't have the acceleration to cause those blackouts, because that's of course what all it's about. Like the blackout happens because of the acceleration factors.
I had a blackout in the Reclaimer and the Valkyrie yesterday in space.
Did you really?
Did you manage that?
High five! That takes effort. That's like trying to black out in an Aurora. You're like, what? That doesn't happen.
Like, okay, but why does then it happen to the people inside the ship?
Yeah.
And
okay.
I mean, that complaint has less to do with the flight model and more to do with design sticking to the rules that they've set for the universe. Like, be consistent. I mean, if you need cargo plates to lock down cargo and vehicles, Why is it that the ship that can carry a vehicle can't carry cargo? But that's a Valkyrie complaint.
That's something else.
We've already talked about that.
Yes.
For our ship shape.
We have been talking about racing and combat quite a lot so far. Another thing I would like to note, which also comes back into combat, is the whole subject around intercepting targets. Because this is, to me, this is not really related directly to the upcoming flight model, but in general, like, if you're going to intercept a target, like somebody that's flying at the maximum SCM speed, so I'm not talking quantum travel, but just like a really fast SCM speeds, how will you handle intercepting of those targets with these different sort of combat systems? Have any of you spent any thoughts on that, especially Traz, when you're talking as a combat pilot? Because I wonder like how that will interact with things.
So a couple of years ago, at CitizenCon 2015, I spent about an hour or so speaking with Calyx Renew. Probably slaughtered his name. Sorry about that, Calyx. And we had that debate because my thing was why doesn't Star Citizen have like a single speed ceiling, and all ships' performance is defined by their acceleration to mass ratio? Like basically your thruster to mass ratio determines your acceleration, and then your acceleration determines your performance, and all ships share the same top speed. His reasoning, the reason why ships have different speed limits, even though those are arbitrarily designed. I mean, there is a speed limit because of the needs of the game engine. So we're not going to get away from that. But why do they have different speed limits at the top, right? And his reason was because you don't want two ships chasing each other to be locked into a never catching. This person never catches this person, and this person can never pull away. So you want to have some variance. Now, I understand that, and I was like, okay, that is a design choice. That makes sense. I get it. All right. Overall, their changes with speeds have actually made me happy. Like, I like the fact that they finally gave all ships, small or large, higher cruise speeds. I feel like that's necessary and appropriate. I'm glad that this new flight model is doing away with the arbitrary speed limits of precision, SCM, cruise. It should be one smooth transition because that's how I fly. And I'm not saying that because I fly, that's why it should be that way. I just say that it's stupid that there is an arbitrary limit.
Would you agree on that from a racing perspective, Ron?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a good thing. But one of the things in the RTV that they answered that I feel like they missed an opportunity, and that somebody asked them if thruster to mass ratio would change dynamically the maximum speeds of a ship. And they basically waffled on it and said that, well, the difference wouldn't be enough to matter much. Well, here's my rebuttal to that.
Empty hull E versus full hull E?
Right.
Well, they did say that weight is going to affect your acceleration.
Acceleration,
yeah. Because they didn't specifically say that. That's what I was hoping they would say. Because I agree with you. I think that's what it should affect.
It might have been me who misunderstood what they said then. But the way I understood it was like the top speed, quote unquote, top speed is going to be the same, but the acceleration is going to change depending on how much weight you have.
I think that's a normal thing to do.
If you could fill up your cargo ship with lead, right, and then you wouldn't be able to take off because you have too much weight. So
yeah.
So
too much mass.
Asuna, you had something as well?
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to implement that acceleration going down if you're having more cargo in the ship. It sounds normal to me.
Yeah, it does. And they didn't specifically say it, but I hope that is where they're going with it.
Sure.
Although I will say this, for the top speeds, so what? If personally, I think that based on the components you equip and the thruster qualities and like your mass to weight ratio should by percentages change your maximum or even reduce your speed. Like you have a baseline, say you have a baseline speed of 1100 and you load your ship up with a bunch of stuff. Not only does your acceleration change a bit, but maybe you lose 5% of your top speed.
No, that's not in space-wise, that's not really how it works. Like it just takes longer to get to the top speed.
We're already working
if you want,
limits.
But if you want those limits, I can see them being part of like the engines you equip, and maybe even the power plants, like how well you can feed whatever engines you got. So those could perhaps indeed affect the top speed of a ship differently. But I don't think that the mass should affect the top speed.
The only reason I say that they should consider that, just as long as those changes are very minuscule up and down, is because of the same reason that Kalix said. He said you don't want ships like locked into a stalemate. The thing is if two people are flying the same ship right now, they're locked into a stalemate. Even if you remove their acceleration performance, like say two Avenger Titans are chasing, one is chasing the other, and the one with the one that's doing the chasing actually has just a little more cargo than the one running away, they're both going to get to their top speed. One is going to get there slower, so there's going to be a gap between them, but then it's still a stalemate with that speed.
Yeah, perhaps overclocking comes into play as well in that.
So, I mean, I think that having that micro change up and down at the top end for speeds, just a percentage or two, would help continue to follow in the design, not philosophy, but their design goals that they expressed about wanting there to be no stalemates, because it would create more versatility, micro differences.
Yeah, that's clear now, but from a racing perspective, because of course, like if you look at racing these days, like anything weight and power, everything is, even the smallest changes they can make, that's a benefit they will go for. So from a racing perspective, how would you see that play out if different components, but also weight, would come into effect your particular racing ship?
I really wouldn't care. It's just more testing, right? Like, they haven't even converted thrusters or anything like that to item 2.0 yet, so I don't know how different components affects my thrusters even. So adding weight to that really doesn't matter. Like, most people already take their shields off because they're tired of hearing shields recharging every time they spawn in. or power low, so we take weapons and shields off and don't get that message anymore.
Yeah, I mean, nice.
It's and the changes to top speed really doesn't matter, at least not right. At least not if they're gonna have this insanely high top speed compared to acceleration, at least with the current tracks, because I have never hit the top speed on any track without crashing into something.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was actually wondering about, because like if you're going to make it so that you can have different components for different top speeds and different levels of acceleration, then for racing it would be
for racing, like changing the top speed wouldn't matter, but I could see it a benefit for like haulers debating whether or not they should go for the higher top end so that they can get to their destination faster compared to something that's more, I don't know, economical.
Right. Maybe like maybe like with Asuna, if you're going for exploration, then you would be saying like, well, I'm just gonna stack up the top speed because I want to be able to get around places faster.
Yeah, like a hull would probably be slow in acceleration but have a high top speed. You take the hull for that over another ship, like a straight trade route or lane would probably be better for the hull. But if you're going to have to go through asteroid fields and such, you'll take another ship for it, because you won't keep your top speed all the time.
Right. Now, I do think that conversation highlights an interesting point. In the sense that there's a difference between Arena Commander, both for combat, as well as for like the Murray Cup courses that we have now, versus the experience that a racer or combat pilot would have in the persistent universe, which is the eventual goal. And like right now, like you have ace combat pilots that come out of Arena Commander and they have very strong opinions about flight characteristics and models that are very biased based on the fact that they play in a very small arena. And, so there are things that they're not used to flying with, they're not used to using, and they have an experience expectation that they transfer with them when they come to the persistent universe. Same thing, I imagine, like for you were saying that it doesn't matter right now because the courses, you never even achieve your top speed, so who cares, right? And that's valid as fuck.
Well, like I can only base my opinion off of what I have, right?
Yeah.
And at least with the current track designs, it doesn't matter. I would love to have tracks, though that would mean they're very straight and kind of boring. If we would, at least if they're lowering the acceleration more than they already have, that would just mean that you would need an even longer straight. And flying straight is not all that entertaining. I'm not a cargo pilot. Like, I don't give a shit about straights.
Well, what about like in the same way that you're commentating for the Murray Cup on Daymar, the Daymar Rally, right? I guess it's not Murray Cup, but I mean you're commentating on that. So that's one of the first races in the persistent universe, but it's all ground-based vehicles. What happens when they start doing races around Delamar and they actually can set up like checkpoint rings that you got to fly through? I mean, I still say that they need to give us a cargo thing that we can deploy as a ring that deploys into the universe so we can race. Oh my God. I used to race. I used to love it. It was, I just haven't raced in a long time now.
I also see a reason why you don't, why they make it so that you don't hit your top speed in racing. It brings more ships together. If having a higher top speed is how you win in racing, then people are going for the faster ship.
It's maneuvering right now, and acceleration.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Acceleration tends to be like one of the key factors.
Let's talk about that 350R when that gets reworked.
Look at modern day Formula One. Like, it's all about getting through the corners at high speed as fast as an acceleration. The top speed of Formula One cars is really not that high. There are plenty of cars out there that go faster than Formula One cars.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing is we have eventually races would hopefully be broken down into like short courses where maneuverability and acceleration are more important, or cornering are more important than say, whereas other races might be more long, like Cannonball Run. That's where the 350R might shine because it's got big ol' ass engines, but it's after the rework. How is it going to ever be competitive with like, a Razor or an M50? They're completely designed differently for different kinds of races altogether. So, but anyways.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up the point of what's in Arena Commander versus the PU, because I think that's also a major point that needs to be considered both by the community and by COG itself. It's like there are really two fairly completely different environments, especially if we're looking at combat-wise. What you're going to fly in a closed arena environment is going to be different from what you're going to be flying out in the persistent universe.
Right.
Simply, I mean, even just looking like, maybe in Arena Command, I'm just going to fly all hard ammo weapons because I just get more ammo all the time. But in the persistent universe, it may just be like, I don't want to do that because I don't know when I can get a refill depending on the area I'm in. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
AKA, they need to balance the game around PU rather than the commander.
I think that
I would like to disagree with that.
Okay.
And purely and I'm not gonna talk about weapons or components and why you would favor ballistic weapons in AC if they actually were better, which they are not currently. Just pointing that out. And that is that. Yes, AC combat is in a smaller scale, and there are certain sort of combat scenarios that you can't duplicate properly in that. But if there's problems with people running away too easily in AC, then this was definitely also a problem in the PU, because the PU is just so much bigger.
Yeah,
and a lot of the combat is still going to be around, I don't know, some sort of cap ship, some sort of, object the enemy team want.
I think that really depends on what you're trying to achieve in your combat. Like, are you fighting over a capital ship or are you chasing down your bounty? I also think, like, do we really say that the flight model as it stands should be the thing that allows us to catch something? Or should we be saying, like, maybe we should take the flight model out of the interception part and just design something else that will aid us in intercepting a target. Because even if you
well, here I'm not necessarily talking about interception. I'm talking about, right now, even in Arena Commander, if you don't want to be in getting shot at, you just fly away.
Yes,
Well,
but that's
I
what I'm
think-
saying. That is intercepting a target that's flying away. Like you're trying to catch the target. But even if you got a speed delta difference of like 5%, and they start that burn soon anyway, it could take forever to catch up because it's a really small difference in speed. So what I want to ask is, like, should we really want the flight model to offer the solution to this particular problem? Because it is something that's being brought up a lot within the flight model, as you say, like, can we catch people and things like that? Or do we need to design maybe like a missile that I can fire at somebody that will, say an EMP missiles that will slow them down or disable their engines or something like that, that perhaps allows us to catch up to these players. But in return, we need to sacrifice something. So do we want the flight model to solve this issue, or do we want the weapons loadout and things like that to solve the issue? Because of course they are combined, but there are arguments to be made, I think.
I mean, I guess it depends on how you go at it. I know a lot of people are against the idea of hand waving things like, EVE Online uses, like tacklers, like when you build a ship specifically to quantum field, slow them down. I mean, we already have bubbles of that are supposed to be what we're kind of looking at using temporarily, at least. Who knows if it'll be long term, as a way to prevent people from quantum driving to escape. But as far as catching them on conventional drives, you're right. You're talking about a window of opportunity. And it depends on, if you're basing it on an acceleration model, then obviously if both ships have a close top speed, maybe it's not the same, but like you said, if they're both at their top speed, the time to catch somebody may be so long that it's just not fun. So then it really comes down to, if they start to shoot away and you quickly pursue them, does your ship have higher acceleration so that you'll close that distance, or are you going to fall away from them? I mean, I don't know. Like that is an interesting question. I mean, without testing, though, it's hard to say. I suppose I personally lean more to the side of, I would rather keep the windows based on your acceleration and performance. And then if you both get to the top speed and you're not in range, then at that point, that tiny percentage of difference will determine whether you catch them. And you just got to suffer through either the escape or the catch, But that's just opinion.
No. Yeah, I think it's going to be a tricky one in that regard, especially regarding the combat discourse all around. I think, as we talked about with the racing, it's going to be a lot of adjusting to the rules that are given. But, I guess there are a lot of preferences to be had regardless. And of course, I think with the flight model, like if you're the current flight model, of course, we're also looking at a difference. Like we're having races in atmosphere and also in space. At least that's the whole idea behind them, from what I've understood. Correct me if I'm wrong. Ron, do you know?
Say again, sorry.
I said the races, they are planning to have races both in atmosphere and in space, right?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine we can race anywhere we want.
Yes, but I'm like,
except for the no-fly zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna
Which
try
is
to
flight
figure.
garbage too. I want to be
That'd be
a
awesome
fighter
if you
area
Do
team.
that as well, but the point is, like, also
Awesome
with
if
the
there was
flight
tech to
model,
shut down a no-fly zone just so you could race through like pirates. Pirate races.
I'm gonna try to glitch myself into a no-fly zone with a ship.
Cannonball run
everybody
style. The
will.
authorities
Then
are
I'm in-
chasing you and the
then I'm-
racers are
Yep.
racing.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
then
Like,
I'm
how awesome
interested.
wouldn't that be?
Yeah, but I'm gonna
Need
be
for Speed, Hot
interested.
Pursuit in space.
Is the no-fly zone like a shield around it, an invisible shield, like no flying? But if you do manage to get your ship in behind that, you could, or is it the entire zone will prevent you from flying? If it's the first one, I can get myself to glitch through that no-fly zone. I'll be able to
How
fly
they were
in a no-fly
talking
zone.
about it at CitizenCon was, you're gonna get a warning, and if you don't fly away, you're just gonna blow up.
Blow
Which
up or
I think is
being
bloody
shot.
garbage.
Yeah.
I want to be able
Yeah,
to
that's
fly
very
through
bad.
Area
That's
18,
beyond.
have all of Crusader security after me,
Yeah, me too.
and 5 stars GTA style and
Yeah, that would be
unheard,
the most fun, I think.
all of this garbage.
It's also
Give me a moment.
beyond our current.
Carde, give me a moment. We've
Yeah.
all seen the Avenger trailer, right? The EMP, the Warlock one.
Yes,
but-
yeah.
Yeah, it's basically flying through the city, having all the police behind you.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you guys seen the new?
want that.
I think it was on the ATV where they showed the rest stops, and Chris was talking about how if don't show up to a rest stop if you're a heavy criminal rating because they are very unkind. And they showed an example of all the auto turrets firing and security and all that. So what we need to do is get a high pirate level and then do races like through and around. Like how many laps can you make it around?
That's also one to do.
Like
Indeed.
dragonflies or something that's not quite as fast as a full-fledged ship. But I don't know.
We'll have to see. One thing I did also want to address on regarding the flight mechanics that I'll also be talking about, of course, is the difference between your standard flight and your VTOL. Because I said, like, for certain things, you need to switch to VTOL mode in order for, like, to take off, for example, in certain ships, because otherwise you won't have enough power to do that. Because they allow you to apparently to rotate thrusters or to, I guess, direct more power to certain things. I'm not really sure what they want. That wasn't very clear to me. But I was wondering, like, if that's going to be in there, could they perhaps, and that's just purely theory crafting on me and maybe ideas, like, could they make it so that you could switch also in space, like go VTOL and get more your 6 directions of freedom flight, but lose in the in your speed and perhaps acceleration department
To change your
forward
primary
angle.
direction of main thrust. I
could,
think that from their suggestions, they were suggesting that yes, that would be a thing eventually. That they're going to decouple, disconnect your landing mode versus your VTOL mode.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't talk about it being used for that particular situation. Like, say you wanted to change your primary direction of strafe to, like, say, up, because that's what it would work
like,
for VTOL, right? Like,
it would
but
be
theoretically,
difference
I imagine
between
you could still do
choosing.
that.
It would be like choosing between flying, as you say, spaceplane mode, or saying, like, I'm going to switch to VTOL. I'm going to lose top speed, but I'm going to gain all of that strafing agility that I have.
Which is 100% more important in combat.
Yeah, but would that not be a fairly decent solution towards a flight system problem that we're seeing with, is that you give, like, okay, you can fly like a space plane, or if you're really on the higher level, then you realize, fuck that shit, we'll switch to VTOL mode when we're in combat, and we're going to use that. So that we can have the best of both fields.
Honestly, what I've found is anytime really skilled pilots start taking advantage of the given to us game mechanics, they're like, oh god, we have to nerf that. I mean,
sounds like basic MMOs.
I'm not even gonna lie. I could go on about it. Never mind. Yeah. Let's just.
If you don't know, have a similar experience regarding to races? That if there are some things that are really, really good in racing, that they nerf it?
Well,
no, because the combat top pilots already made sure it got nerfed, so no.
I mean, that's the thing is, like, racing isn't impacting other people, whereas PvP absolutely is where the balance has to. Everything falls down. Water falls from the balance that happens at the PvP level. At least if you're going to design it right. And so I'm sure racing was impacted by the changes, right? But those changes definitely came from how people flew in. I mean, the best example I can think of is back when hard ammo had ranges of like 5,000 to 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers, and energy weapons were in the like 1,000 to 3,000 kilometer range, and everybody was flying an SCM. I'm a decoupled pilot. I would decouple, turn on afterburner, and I would have my speed would go from 0 to whatever the maximum cruise speed was, and I would control my personal speed using my own inputs instead of letting SCM artificially limit me. Therefore, I would fight against these ace arena commander pilots that would come into the persistent universe, and they would be with heavy gun meta build, super kill you in 2 seconds loadouts that had a short ass range, and they're flying an SCM, and I would just stay outside of their bubble of threat and rain hard ammo down on them. If they were smart, they would have used the slow munition velocity and the fact that I have limited ammo, and they would have just run me out of ammo until I had to engage them at close range, where their advantage lied. But instead, everybody cried about people kiting them, or, oh, they're jousting, or because they didn't have a strong control of their ship yet. And then Chris nerfed it. He's like, well, we're going to move to this close range because we want things to be cinematic. We don't want you to fight dots in space. Here's a question I actually have for you guys. So right now in the 3.3 PTU Arena Commander build, everything is slow and everything's at close range. However, do you feel that is legitimately creating a more cinematic, fun experience, or is the loss of the enjoyment of the speed and intensity of those combats that we used to have actually made up for fighting at close range? Because I have an opinion on that. But what do you guys think?
Well, I don't think it's more cinematic, but
why?
I don't. Well, it just means. But I do like the fact that I can actually see my opponent. It's not just a dot. So I'm gonna say I'm impartial. I don't really prefer one over the other.
So I have a question. How well do you actually see your target at like 500 meters?
Usually fairly well.
I mean, well, my experience has been that it's black on black. So I'm still looking at a triangle bracket that surrounds my target, but the ship itself, it's not highlighted. So it's just a black blotch against a black starry background, unless I'm lucky, or unless we're so close that I can actually see it. But even then, I'm still looking at a largely dark ship because we're in space. There's no lights that are highlighting.
500 meters is a substantial range to see.
It is, and that's still close range, right? So here's the thing: is the heads-up display. I think that it's okay to fight at those close ranges, but I don't see that. I don't feel like I'm looking at a video right now.
Let's give it also to Asuna as well on this one before we go.
Sure. I wrap up what I was saying. I was just saying that I don't think it is making the difference that Chris is asking it to make.
Oh no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Asuna.
I do also like to see my enemy. It's part of prettiness of the game. Like,
sure.
If I never see the ships, then people can be flying belts for all I care. But what I hope they implement is like a digital sniper scope that you can put inside your cockpit, and that's especially for the long range. I like sniping. Put in a sniper scope view that's digital in the ship, and you can see the ship from far away, and you'll have far away combat, but you can still see your target fairly close.
Just look here, like if this is my crosshair is on my nose here, I want that screen to be like here, just displaying the ship that I am indeed targeting, and I can just see my impacts on that ship if I'm hitting them.
I have another suggestion for that too. That would help.
I can still shoot. I'm still shooting the pit because I don't want. You can't shoot in a sniper scope because you need to be aiming way ahead of a ship generally most of the time. But by able to see at least where you hit, you can also adjust your aim a little bit.
Right, lead or lag pips will help with that. But here's another thing. Like what I found. Have you guys seen the new ship shop where you can buy ships in the Precision Universe?
It's been empty for
me. No, I've not yet.
I mean, have you seen any of the videos on it?
Yeah.
Or if you've interacted with any item in Star Citizen, what happens when you highlight over that item?
Becomes orange.
It outlines it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, instead of having a bracket that the ship is somewhere in the middle, because in Arena Commander right now, I can have my pip, my 0 pip, directly centered within that triangle where the ship supposedly is, and I can't see it because it's black on black, and I can fire and I'll miss. So I still have to adjust. Desync. Well, possibly, yeah, some desync, sure. But I mean, basically, you have to lead your ships to hit them right now. And the problem is you have no idea what direction that ship is facing. You can look in the upper right-hand corner of your HUD and see on that, but you're not going to take your eyes off the center screen when you're in the middle of combat. If they just highlighted the ship and did away with that little triangle thing and you just see a highlight of the ship, that would give you a much more cinematic experience. It would give you a better idea of what direction your targeted ship is heading, because like even the engine trails that they added to help with that haven't helped. It just I don't know. I
too.
recorded a video like 2 days ago because I wanted to know for myself, because I kind of took a break from Arena Commander since 3.0 because ESP was so broken. They broke decoupled like 7 ways from Sunday, and it wasn't fun anymore. And
I think that you could combine those two very well. It's like give it an outline and give that sniper scope down below. That would really help
range,
you. Yeah, but not even just long range, but even at these close ranges at 500 meters. At 500 meters, if I'm going to park a side-by-side for you, a Saber and a Hornet, and I'm going to ask you, just by pure eyesight, to ID them, you're going to struggle. You're going to really struggle to ID those two ships. Just when they're parked like this at 500 meters. Because 500 meters is a fucking long distance. People just don't realize the absolute scale. Like, even shooting things at those ranges, that's a lot. Like, if you look at like tank-on-tank combat, for example, that's the kind of, they would fight at 500 to 2 kilometers of ranges. And you're fighting purely mostly almost on sensors, like in high magnification optics and stuff to see the things.
I just want to let you know that tank lives matter.
Tonk.
Fuck.
Always tonk.
Don't get me started on the Nova Tonk, please. Absolutely.
I find it amazing.
For an hour.
Go vote.
I find the tonk joke amazing.
Yeah, but I think those two combined could actually really help in that regards to make it feel more interesting and also perhaps then increase the ranges of the combat again. Because personally, like, I really hate this claustrophobic ranges that I'm fighting at. Like, there are literally weapons on my spaceship that have less range than a freaking sniper rifle I can get today. Like, people have been shot with a sniper rifle at longer ranges than a space-age cannon on my ship in an environment where 0 gravity or whatever can shoot an enemy ship. That's like, if you want to talk about immersion breaking, that's quite high up there for me. But that all aside on that one, I do want to bring up one final point regards to the whole flight model. And that's bringing it into the also very famous debate that's all going around regarding of pay to win. You see, in my personal opinion, the higher the skill ceiling, the lower a pay to win factor, as far as it's there, that can be argued, is going to be a factor. Because if you can have a really high skill ceiling, that means that somebody in a arguably far worse off ship, whether it's combat or whether it's racing, can easily defeat somebody that's in a much better ship but doesn't have the same skill. But if the skill ceiling gets too low, a lot more people are going to get close to that skill ceiling, and the performance delta difference again is going to be too small for that to be in effect. So in that case, you really are, arguably buying your power when you're buying that better ship.
Right.
How do you guys think on that one? Starting with Asuna for this one.
Mostly agree, but on the other hand, a faster and better ship is in the end better. So
in the end, if you have the skill to make use of it.
Yeah, but I also feel that a better ship will need more handling and more skill.
Yeah, but that's why if the skill ceiling would be too low, then you could maximize the performance of that ship, even if you're not very good at pilot. Whereas the skill ceiling was a lot higher, you could not maximize the performance of that ship. So you're going to lose out.
True.
Rum, what do you think on that one?
Pay to win is still pay to win. Like,
mm-hmm.
And I don't. It doesn't matter. This is a multiplayer game. It doesn't matter if it's garbage pilot who had way too much money and too little time, or if it's top-notch Jesus combat, Jesus racing pilot, Jesus cargo, I don't know, whatever. Little guy who has way too much money, well, if we'll just be like, well, you're better at this. Here, have some money and protect me. So Yes and no. That's...
Yeah, but that's if you're going to, but like I'm purely talking when you're in opposition to each other. So if you're racing, like if say we two are going to race, you're going to be flying a Mustang Alpha, and I'm going to be flying the Misk Razor.
Then you're probably going to win.
I'm willing to bet that if we're going to do that right now.
Maybe
podcast.
right now you wouldn't because you don't know the tracks and that sort of deal.
I've done some of the racing. I've done a whole series on the pay to win when we're going to renting the ships.
One. It's
like
a fast ship.
The Alpha is a really bad ship. Like just you know, the lay of the land. Like I've been able to beat people in M50s while flying a Hornet, but that is not, you know, those people are not good at flying. They're not even, I wouldn't even call them decent at racing. Like, they're just there because they heard that the M50 was the best ship, and then they're using that without consideration of how to actually fly.
Yeah.
People that spend a lot of
time. And it doesn't matter if it's a high or low. Well, yeah, it does matter to extent, but as soon as that garbage pilot just gets a little bit up, he's still going to have a huge advantage when he has, you know, 20 million UAC and I'm sitting here with my Mustang.
I feel that the really garbage pilots, or in any profession,
I know that's a rude word, but...
Well, okay. Like the horrible pilots or the horrible people in any profession will quit their profession quite fairly soon if they're not enjoying it and if they're not getting better. Even if you have a top-notch ship. I might have an Idris and I might suck at controlling the Idris. I'm probably gonna quit flying the Idris fairly soon. That's at least me. I have a Raven, and that's quite fast and quite maneuverable. I'm a horrible racer, and I quit racing fairly fast.
The Raven is a bad racer.
I as far as in relation to racing, I would say that racing is kind of its own special thing, where it's like you plateau in the sense that first of all, if you want to learn to race, this is my opinion, and the super experienced racer can say, but I would say that you actually don't want to start with a ship that's too powerful for, like, if you start off with a super fast, super aggressive, ultra handling ship, it's going to be too much car for you to drive. You want to start with something a little smaller while you learn the course, while you learn the track, while you learn your turns, learn everything, and then slowly graduate up into those faster ships that have the handling. But right, like the racing courses can definitely be a great place to just learn how to fly, because you don't have to deal with combat and weapons and targeting and all that. All you have to do is focus on basically turning your ship and controlling your general acceleration. So it can be a great stepping stone, but to master racing, eventually I think an experienced pilot in a lesser ship is still going to easily crush a mediocre or even decent pilot in a higher value racing ship. Well, just because I think racing is different than combat and the kinds of advantage you get out of the money you put in. Does that sound right?
To an extent, yeah. Like me being in, you know, the guy having all the money and me having not as much. We're still flying. Let's say we're still flying like the top racing ship, so Racer, M50, 350R or something. Like the base values, hopefully, ain't gonna be so big that me having the default components is not gonna matter as much compared to the extra amount of time and energy I've spent in learning fly them compared to someone completely new and just bought all the best components.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
So I think if we were flying equal ships and someone were just having better components, pay to win wouldn't be as big a deal because skill level and that sort of deal. But we have people with several $1,000s worth of spaceships, and now because they changed the UEC cap and that sort of deal.
Yeah,
no.
that's
A big topic we had.
a big topic we had. But like for me, but Traz also go on this on regarding the combat. But the main reason I brought this point up for me is like it's not about the fact that it's not there. Like there's always going to be that factor. Like if you're going to buy the battleship, you're always going to have that advantage.
It is there right now. It's very heavy.
But like it's the lower the skill ceiling is. That's my argument. The bigger the advantage is of having that ship, because if you're that pilot and you're at this level of ship and the skill ceiling is here, the difference between these 2 points is not as great as if the skill ceiling would have been all the way up here.
Right. But basically the defense against the whole idea of pay to win is that, ships are, they're an advantage, but they're limited in role, they're limited in you can only go so high before you have to have multi-crew, and then it's teamwork and all these other things. But if the skill ceiling to be in the top 5% or 10% of combat is so low that everybody's going to be able to achieve that quickly, and there's not really any mechanics that allow you to go beyond that, to excel beyond a certain proficiency level, then or where proficiency no longer matters in determining victory, that just means that the ship you bought has a larger determining factor in the victory than your actual skill. And so it all it does is weaken the argument that Star Citizen isn't pay to win, or strengthen the argument that it is. And so I can see that. That makes logical sense to me.
To talk a bit for the pay to win argument, it's been there since the start. Like we've been able to pledge for different ships from the very beginning.
The key is I'm trying to bring it into the flight model that we're dealing with right now. Because for the way I've been looking at it and also been hearing it, like people are saying this new flight model by the looks of it, because it's going to remove a lot of that 6 direction of freedom flight, which is quite a different skill set and quite a bit higher than just flying airplanes in space. I mean, I can see that skill ceiling dropping substantially.
Depends on how they do it.
Depends on how they do it, but from what we've seen right now, that's what I'm seeing, and that's where I'm bringing forward this argument. Because do we think that's going to be an issue with
Traz is the only one that's been able to play the new flight model.
Actually, I didn't play it while I was at CitizenCon. CitizenCon had the opportunity to play it. It was in the Drake lab. I figured that the changes are going to change, and I don't want to mess with it until it's there. So, full disclosure, I didn't play it. I mean, I watched some reviews on it, and I listened to some experienced pilots who did go and play with it. My thing is like, I'm picky. I fly with pedals and 2 sticks, and I have a very custom configuration in order, because unless you're testing it in your own home environment, like you need to, anytime you're doing any kind of scientific test, you have to remove all the variables. So if I go in and I jump on a mouse keyboard setup at CitizenCon playing on some rig with the keybinds all set to default, that's not going to give me the kind of, that's going to give me just as little valid information to make a comparison about that model as, just looking at what they've changed and watching other videos on it and whatever. So, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, anybody else have something to add before we're going to go to our closing thoughts and possible solutions for this whole situation?
Not me.
Last call.
No, I think I have some ideas about how I hope that they're gonna pursue this, because I mean, they've announced a lot of positive things that I am pro about, but there are also some things that seriously concern me. I kind of feel like we didn't really talk about the very specific things that they've said that they're going to change. So we talked a lot of theory today. And I kind of wish we'd done that more, but maybe that'll be another episode, or at the end of the day, everybody's seen it themselves, so they're going to have their own opinions. So all we would be doing is offering our own opinions. So who cares? So you're right. I think we should move on to solutions, and I will happily not go first.
Not me.
Well, that leaves me, I guess.
New guy.
I don't want to give a solution. because I would need to try, the solution that COG is trying to figure out before I'm really gonna say whether or not it's good or decent, or it needs this and this area needs work. This is not fun. This is fun. That sort of deal. And it's them saying that they changed the values from a fixed speed to acceleration. That's cool and all, but until I actually try it and see how the lower thruster values actually work.
Right. Do you see are there any problems that you potentially can forecast? I mean, obviously you're right. We don't know until we play it,
No.
but is there anything about what they've announced that concerns you? I mean, just for the general flight experience.
I am generally worried about the lower thruster values in general, because I doing these really tight, really fast corners, and if I'm sliding around like a brick, then I can't do it, right?
Do you remember the patch when they slowed all the speeds down to the slowest that they ever did? And remember, there was a giant outcry, and then they raised them back up again. Remember that patch? It was right when they got rid of the long weapon ranges. They shortened all the way.
I didn't start playing until 2.6. So I don't know.
Okay. I think actually, I remember the complaint was when you were flying over planetary surfaces, it was super slow and it just felt like you were crawling. So it had to have been after 3.0.
Well,
that was in Planet Speed,
they changed. Well, in 3.1, the original boost was broken. Yeah. Where someone had set the boost values to 0.5 instead of 1. They then changed that to 3.11, and those times was really quick. So, it might have been a complaint from 3.1, but in that case, it was due to the broken booster values.
I really should have kept, a change log of all the different flight models so I could compare, but
too much.
Too late now.
We got time to look on the internet.
So
I am running at 1.5 hours.
But yeah, generally I'm worried about the lowered thruster values and how that's going to affect my enjoyment. But other than that, I'm just looking forward to actually trying it out myself and see which areas that needs improvements, because I know they're going to need to be improvements, because it's CIG's QA team who's testing it. No offense.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm worried about the big ships more. How it's going to affect the big ships. Like you talked about, Rum, the lower maneuvering thruster values. How is it going to affect the bigger ships that are already quite slow?
Especially in deceleration, because last I played, if you're flying around in a caterpillar or something like that, you need to start slowing down 60, 70 clicks away from your destination, or you're just going to crash into the ground.
So I have some thoughts on that. So for instance, I feel like starting at the Constellation, they overdid the too slow business on that, and it needs, but whatever. But moving up to the bigger ships, here's what I think. This might work. Either you can do the whole 180 and use your mains to slow down, which will actually be super cool. I think that'd be awesome if you want to turn around, point your ass towards your direction of travel while you're drifting into Atmo, and then retro burn to slow back down. That would be cool.
The one point is, the problem with that is, and it's
you can't see where you're going.
Yeah, you can't see where you're going. So you need to be able to set up flight paths. If you can say I'm going there, set a flight path to going there, and then your flight computer, you can even go into your flight computer okay, at this point you need to flip around and start going backwards. Because I think on these big ships, and I know that it's still talking about it, autopilot is going to be needed.
Or at least more information. We need more information from the flight computers that calculates, hey, you need this distance to slow down to 0, under this deceleration rate. That would be great. In the same way that I also think that they need to have an altimeter that doesn't just show you your altitude once you're in atmosphere. There needs to be an altimeter that shows you you're this far away from entering atmosphere. so that you know when not to accidentally cross into it, right? But that's a safety feature. But the other thing to answer your question, Asuna, or at least your concern, was with VTOL thrusters, I've always wondered, like, so in atmosphere, they're talking about your planar surface. So like if a caterpillar head on straight at you is like looking at a pencil, right? It's going to shoot right at you. But if you turn that pencil sideways, you have a giant flat area that would work against lift and drag to slow you down. So,
like
and if your VTOL thrusters, are your most powerful thrusters on the ship, aside from the mains, would you slow down faster if you turned your ship 180 degrees to your direction of travel, or 90 degrees to your direction of travel, and just slowed down with the bottom of your ship facing your direction of travel? You know what I mean? Like,
Asuna wanted to say something on that one, so.
What you got?
I've flown the Starfarer and the Reclaimer, and surprisingly, the Starfarer is slower at accelerating than the Reclaimer. The Reclaimer is actually more maneuverable.
Right.
I've crashed my Starfarer more times than I've landed it. Because it's so slow.
That doesn't require a whole lot. It's awful shit.
Yeah. So
I think that's all of us.
If you're
That's all right.
I like to know where I'm going, especially if I'm close to the ground. I like to see it.
Right.
But if I'm going too fast, because I can't deaccelerate enough, because my thrusters are even slower or weaker in 3.4, then I'm going to crash even more. And I've flown a little bit. Yeah.
Another thing that, they're in the RTV, they were talking about how if you have VTOL thrusters and you turn sideways, you'll start to slide. Mm-hmm. That's already been around for a while. But the problem is we have no way to land our ships without going to third person mode. So like if you tilt your ship down to look at your target, to like say you're trying to stick your giant Caterpillar or Starfarer inside the Levski hangars, you go to turn to look and your ship just starts to race down towards it, and you like pull up and you try to brake and you can't even brake. It's ridiculous. It's like they want us to fly these ships, but they've nerfed the cockpits with too many struts.
Struts are not the issue regarding to the Lord ships. But
I'm always landing in third person mode, except when the ship actually has the display for showing when I'm landing correctly, and show the ground. But many ships don't, and then I have to go in third person, breaking my immersion.
But yeah, that's really UI issues, I think. But yeah, so larger ships will likely struggle. Anything else that you think they should look at?
I'll wait for December to come.
Okay. Traz?
Okay. God, where was going to go? Okay, so the core issues that I see in it, has to do with the same thing with the maneuvering thrusters. My fear is that while reducing maneuvering thrusters and creating a main-centric flight model for all the human ships that all look like airplanes, that's great for atmospheric flight, because atmospheric flight has lift and it has conservation of energy, the kinds of tactics that you can explore in any of the many warplane, dogfighting, simulation, non-simulation games that are out there that already exist. The problem is when you go to space and you have that same flight model and you don't have the ability to fly your spaceship like a spaceship, i.e. the ability to turret, the ability to circle strafe, mixed in with central line thrust, you don't have lift, and you don't have the theories or the effects of conservation of energy to play into your combat, which means you actually end up with a much more dull combat experience. Combine that with the fact that they're trying to shorten your weapon ranges because they want it to be cinematic, the lack of these other UI elements that we talked about that would help make it more cinematic, and that they slow it down so much that right now combat in the 3.3 PTUAC feels like it's unrushed. It's like dancing ballet. Like, I love that I can still do 6 degrees of freedom flight in 3.3 Arena Commander, but it feels unhurried. It feels there's no sense of urgency. It's not enjoyable, Never mind weapon balance, never mind time to kill, time to disable. I mean, all of that stuff can be balanced, but just the speed, the lack of speed alone makes it very blasé. Now let's combine that. Now we remove maneuvering thrusters. So they're talking about the idea of, now it's going to have that other flight model. What do you call it? Asteroids, where basically, like asteroids, like the video game where like you would fire your thrusters and you shoot off this direction, you would turn, and then you would fire your thrusters to slow down, and then you shoot off this way. The thing with that is, so you're going to have to turn and burn in order to dodge incoming fire, is what that suggests, right? Because your maneuvering thrusters aren't going to be able to handle rapid course corrections or vector changes. So what's going to happen is at first everybody's going to overshoot and they're going to do that jousting thing where they drift away and nobody hits anybody and everybody complains about it. Then the more experienced pilots are going to finally dial in their fighting, and it's going to be like, okay, we accelerate, then we slow down, and then we get into weapons range, which is close range, and you got these super fast shooting weapons that you can't dodge when you're at that range and you have no maneuvering power. And you're just going to slug it out like two dudes standing there exchanging blows until one person falls down. That doesn't sound fun. They tried it before, so I don't know if it's just because this is a new design team taking over and they just are not aware of the lessons already learned. Okay, so that's the problem, and those are the concerns I have. The solutions, the only way I can see it, and these are solutions that have been discussed within the community, discussed within the Facebook group, the admin team, like I've polled everybody I could. The only way, like the hope is that they won't go too far. That regardless of the fact that these ships look like airplanes and have rear engine bias, this is the one time where fun is more important than simulation in my eyes. Please do not nerf these ships to the point where they're just airplanes in space, because that's not even airplanes in space, because airplanes have lift. That's power boats in space. Is that going to be fun? I mean, if you have power boats, never mind. I already covered that. So the thing is now if they go to it and they say, okay, well, the Hornet has really strong multi-directional thrusters, it'll still be pretty decent at strafing. Okay. If they say, the Gladius is, can pitch and turn, so it's great in atmosphere, but it's a little less at doing, the strafing combat. And then say you look at, what are some other good example ships? Trying to remember, I had it up on screen a minute ago. Basically, if they go ship by ship and they find ways to make it so that 6 degrees of freedom isn't completely not an option just because you're flying a human airplane ship, then that'll be okay. You know what I mean? Like, you want there to be variety between the different ships, but I mean, if they completely strip the 6 degree of freedom gameplay out of the game, except for in ships like the Jean Scout, the Scout that has 2 size 3 weapons that has lower DPS than the 85X, which is a snub fighter, like, or whatever insulting gesture I can make. At the end of the day, if that's the only fun ship to fly, but it has tiny DPS to make up for the fact that they want to force everybody into this very narrow channel of combat experience, like, I hope they don't do that. I don't. It goes back to, like you were saying, I'm not worried about it causing an issue of pay to win. I'm more worried about it just by lowering that skill ceiling, that they're just basically homogenizing the combat experience so that they can avoid the challenges of trying to balance all of these ships in the long haul, And by doing that, I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to make Star Citizen a bad game, because Star Citizen is so many games in one. You've got the first-person shooting, you've got the mining, you've got all these other game loops that are going to come. Yeah, I'm almost there. All these other game loops are going to come, so the game may still be 100% great. I mean, obviously, I'm so invested. Of course, I'm going to stay in it. But the flight combat is what makes it sing. It's what brought so many backers to the table. And if they trash that flight model just because it makes it easier to manage design, that's like going from EverQuest 1 to EverQuest 2. And if anybody knows their game history, those two games share the same name, but they are not the same game. It's basically losing the spirit of what made Star Citizen great.
So
no.
What you would say solution-wise is don't?
No, I'm not saying don't. Because there's a lot of the things that they are including. We didn't talk about the specific things that they're bringing into the flight model, but there was a lot of things that were positive. Like, I thought it was positive that they got rid of the speed limits and it's just one fluid speed. I thought it was positive that they're talking about having a SCM, like a toggle that you turn it on and it limits you within a flight range. That's great.
Yeah, the limiter.
Yeah, you know what they do need to do is they need to make Space Break analog. And this talk that they were talking about removing Space Break altogether shows a complete ignorance of decoupled flight model and need, which scares the shit out of me.
Even a lot of the people flying coupled use Space Break.
Yes, because reverse thrust and Space Break do two different things. In the way you're as a racer, I bet you know what I'm talking about.
Reverse thrust is very bugged a lot of the time, where Space Break is not.
Oh, well, I hadn't even tracked that. For me, when I'm flying decoupled, reverse thrust will pull me off of a target, so that if I'm trying to miss something, like I don't want to impact, I don't want to crash into something, reverse thrust will pull my heading off target so I can get around it. But like say an enemy pilot is flying past me and I want my nose on them so I can shoot them in the face or butt as they go by me, Space Break will pull me onto target. So they both handle differently, but then even moving that aside, Space Break is critical to any decoupled pilot, but other conversation. I don't know. There were a lot of positive things that come out of this. I just don't want them to go to this whole extreme where they're like, well, it's an airplane and look at the giant engines and the small engines. Of course, this is going to be, if they have to fake it in that one thing just to make sure that spaceships can fly like spaceships, my opinion is that since Star Citizen's spaceship combat is going to be 95% in space, 5% in atmosphere, you got to make sure that the space part is both fun and different than the atmospheric part. And so far, they sound like they're going more to the one extreme. I'm hoping they don't, or I'm hoping that they're at least willing to hear about dialing that back. I'm sure, hopefully there'll be enough community feedback that they do. But I feel like the people who actually fly and have something to say with any authority or experience are such a small number these days that they can easily just not listen to us. So if it comes down to a choice that they're just going to go with it because it's easier to balance the game by having a lower skill ceiling, I don't know.
Yeah. So I think it comes down, if I'm looking at all the solutions that we're hearing and the issues, is we're looking at a definite concern about just loss of thrust, whether it's main engine thrust or whether it's maneuvering, trusted thrusts, all of those things that are just going to slow things down, which will affect different sorts of gameplays in different ways. But from what I understand, the agreement is pretty much all of it is bad. Because we want some of the speed to be in there. We want to have our movement in, as I said, in space. We want that 6-directional movement because, well, we're in space. We want to have an actual space game and fly around like we're flying spaceships and not flying planes in space, which a lot of games have done in the past. And from my personal experience, what I've seen, like that's one of the things that, you know, Star Citizen promised to be, was like, you know, flying an actual spaceship in space and not flying another plane in space, because that's been done to death, and we really want something proper in maneuvering. And right now it seems that we're going in the other direction from the information that we currently have available to us. Of course, we do need to get our hands on the system,
right,
to really try it. And I think also beyond getting our hands on the system, when come December, whenever it's going to be fully implemented, like the information again they provide on it is like they could be more clear and they could be more precise on it. Because from what I've heard, like the few proper questions that were being asked in regards to the system were not really answered really well, and got a feeling like they didn't really know. Which,
well, problem especially with the R2V was a lot of the answers was, well, in order to explain this properly, you really need to have your hands on.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, but I'm going to be very countering on that one. If you're going to tell me you need to get your hands on it, then you don't know what the fuck you're designing. Because if you're designing something, you should be able to explain to me how
I think David Coulson knows exactly what he's doing. I just don't think he's very good on camera. And
maybe.
I know that he's a very nice person. I've chatted with him several times, but he's not the best person to describe things.
Then
He is engineer by choice, and it's great
Right.
that
That's
CIG is
completely
putting
fine.
those out there.
Not everybody is in like that, but then one of the solutions is put somebody in the seat that can explain those things better.
One other thing, I know we're kind of closing up, but a community concern that I think people would challenge us on that we haven't addressed is you also have the idea within the community of pilots who are like, what if you're going at these high speeds, what are we going to do to limit that? Because that's not fun. It's a flyby, it's jousting, yada, yada. And like, what do we do to limit and stop people from doing that? To preempt that, I would say that there's a self-built limit when you're fighting at high speeds. And that limit is just human reflexes. Like, I would only fight. I mean, even when I could fly in the thousands, I would always slow down to like in the 250 to 400 speed range to give me the maximum speed I could personally deal with while trying to stay above my opponent, and as a racer, I'll bet, can you speak to that? What do you think? Is that accurate to say that we humans have our own limits and you don't really need artificial limits on speed?
Well, right now, to a certain extent, it depends on how challenging the different sections are, because currently there's some sections where I feel like I'm being limited by how the current flight model is compared to the reaction time and that sort of deal that I have.
Right.
But I would argue, of course, that because I don't really want to continue onwards too long now, I would say there are always going to be limiting factors towards any flight model and any ship you're going to be flying. That's going to be inherent also, and that's a fact. Even if you take any race car today, they also have the limits, so you should keep those around and as the limits, of course, within a car or a ship design. I think the key is, of course, we don't want the limit to be inherent in the flight model, but we want limitations to be inherent to ships, because that's also something you pointed out, Traz. Like, if you're going to do this, like, look at each ship differently and make each ship do their own thing. That way, your limitations are going to be within the ship. So yeah. Maybe
what are Xi'an engines going to do? Like, right in the lore, Xi'an engines are supposed to have like special multi-directional handling characteristics, but then you look at the Freelancer, which is still a big engine bias to the rear.
Exactly. So those are the things that we need to be looking at. I think that's part of the solutions. Like, if you want to go in this direction, then at least balance towards each individual ship. I would also say one of the things, keep the skill ceiling there, keep the skill ceiling in place, because it is also the most interesting thing if people want to strive for something. If the skill ceiling is too low, it just loses a lot of fun. I've seen this happen also in other games. So like a high skill ceiling is not a bad thing, as long as there is a decent place where most people can reasonably get to be at least efficient in any given field or ship or whatever they're doing. But that's, of course, going to be the huge balancing act, and I think that's going to be key there. So overall, I think that pretty much covers it up. So we have I think there are a lot of concerns. It comes down to, we want to try it out, but balance it per ship, don't go too slow, and keep in mind everything, and listen to the most experienced pilots. They are the ones that can give you the best possible feedback. If you're going to listen to a pilot like myself, going to give you feedback on the flight system, I'm going to give you shitty feedback. Yes. I will come and deal with you later.
For me, it's there.
Yeah, for me, it's over there.
Well, it depends on where you're looking at. I mean, on the OBS, it's different than the.
Yeah, for you, it's on the right.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Anyhow, I'm just going to close it down now, because I think we have been going on to quite some length in it. We have
you're right. It is
points being brought onto it.
Dang.
No, it's the other way.
So,
on OBS.
Stop messing around, you bunch of chokers. Now you see what we have to deal with here all the time. So thank you very much for sticking around with that. But yeah, with that,
Unlimited UEC.
Shut up.
Or I will mute you.
Well, that, citizens, will mark the official end of our podcast for this episode. I do hope you all enjoyed it, and it will start some critical but constructive thinking and debates. As always, we hope today's episode will help Star Citizen to succeed. Also, a special thanks for our guest this episode, Rumged. Really appreciate it for your feedback over here and your thoughts on it. Brought some extra news perspectives for us here, and that's always enjoyable. If you do enjoy the podcast, as always, feel free to share and all of those things. Keep in mind, we are making no money from this podcast, and we're also not planning to make any money from it. This is purely a service from us towards the community and also towards CIG in helping to provide a platform for constructive criticism.
Speaking of constructive, awesome community things, I think Rumged should plug the Daymar Rally. Tell us about your rally coming up in a week.
Oh yeah.
Before we go.
So on the
what do people need to know?
4th, something like that, of November, Daymar Rally is doing their a practice run with commentators, where Croatian Gaming and myself are doing the commentating.
Where can people see this?
On twitch.tv/Daymar Rally.
Awesome.
And
time?
We'll put a link to that in the description.
Okay.
DaymarRally.com. Time zone conversion stuff is there.
Awesome. All right, so November 3rd, November 4th, Daymar Rally, DaymarRally.com, as well as on Twitch TV. So if you want to watch it, make sure you like and subscribe and follow them and find them and check it out.
Indeed.
And don't forget.
Oh yeah. Oh, and don't forget to release the Kitty Kraken.
It seems we have a lot of plush toys this week around.
This is my
Also, say
only.
hello to Dad. He's up there.
This is my only teddy bear. It's
This
a
is
platypus.
always-
I got it when I was in Australia.
Oh, nice.
It's amazing.
This is my lovely
Australia.
little house.
Do also join us in the Discord server. A link for that will also be found in the description down below, where you can talk some more Star Citizen or some other stuff. Also provide us with feedback. You can also do that on YouTube in the comment section down below. We are, as always, trying to improve. If you're interested in becoming a guest, do also join our Discord and contact one of our main hosts. And you can fill out a form which we can use to match you up best to topics that we're going to be discussing. So, with that all said and done with, once again, a final thanks to all of our hosts and our guests. And we hope you enjoyed it and you tune in for the next time for some more Citizen Situation.
Come by.